3 hours after Nicholas DeMarco had signed a man's death warrant on the other side of Boston, he was kneeling on the cold tile floor of a bathroom that did not belong to him, a copper basin resting between his knees as he held my bleeding foot in his hands. He had no reason to be gentle with anyone. The people of Boston knew him as a ruthless man who never hesitated when business demanded cruelty. Yet there he was, carefully washing blood from my injured feet with his own hands. He said nothing. He did not react when he saw the broken glass buried in my skin. He simply cleaned every wound with the patience of a man terrified that one wrong movement might hurt something he could not bear to lose. Whenever the water in the basin became red, he emptied it and filled it again. His expensive shirt sleeves were soaked nearly to his elbows before he finally noticed. That was Nicholas DeMarco, the man the North End whispered about, as if his name itself carried danger. And I was Clara Whitaker, the woman who had crossed a fire escape covered with broken glass because I needed to warn him that someone inside his own family was preparing to destroy him. 2 months earlier, I would have laughed if anyone had told me that a mafia boss would one day kneel at my feet. 2 months earlier, I did not even know Nicholas existed. My life had been simple before that. My name is Clara Whitaker, and this is the story of the year my brother's death nearly buried me, and the year the most feared man on Boston's waterfront refused to let it happen. 9 months before Nicholas washed the blood from my feet, my brother Sam died on Route 2 outside Concord. His car had been traveling far too fast on a road where he had no business being that late at night. The police called it a single-vehicle accident. My mother's former attorney called it a terrible tragedy. Everyone else carefully avoided saying the word that seemed to sit underneath every conversation. Suspicious. Sam had been a bookkeeper for a shipping company, and bookkeepers did not usually die while driving 90 miles per hour on an ordinary Tuesday night in November. A week before his death, Sam had called me from a payphone at a small diner outside Worcester. I thought the call was strange at the time, but I did not understand why until much later. He sounded tired and distracted. He told me that he loved me. Then he told me that if something happened to him, the small green ledger from our mother's flower shop belonged to me. I asked him what he meant. He avoided the question. I asked again. He was silent for several seconds before saying, "Clara, just remember." Then the call ended. It was the last time I ever heard my brother's voice. I buried Sam beside our mother in a small cemetery in Vermont. After the funeral, I closed the little cottage where we had grown up and moved to Boston. Our mother had left me a flower shop on Beacon Hill, and I decided to reopen it. I convinced myself that work would keep me from drowning in grief. There would always be something to do. Peonies would arrive in spring. Dahlias would fill the shop in autumn. Ribbons would need to be sorted. Orders would have to be prepared. Customers would come through the door. I told myself grief was a season and that eventually I would grow beyond it. I was wrong. One Thursday in October, 2 men walked into my flower shop. They did not yell. They did not threaten me directly. The taller man simply looked at me and spoke my full name as if he had memorized it. "Miss Whitaker, Clara Whitaker of Whitaker Flowers." I nodded. "That's me." Without thinking, my hand moved toward the florist's shears lying on the workbench. The taller man noticed, but did not seem concerned. He told me that my brother owed $612,000 to a man named Anthony Corsetti. Then he told me something worse. Sam had apparently stolen something that belonged to the Corsetti family, and Anthony Corsetti had decided that his sister could answer for her brother. I reminded him that Sam had been dead for 9 months. The man gave me a cold smile. "Then his debts belong to you now." He placed a card on the counter. There was no name on it, only a phone number and the word Wednesday. He told me that I had until Wednesday to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Then he and the other man walked out. The bell above the door made a bright little sound as they left, and somehow that cheerful noise made the entire moment feel even more disturbing. I locked the front door, turned the sign around, and sat on the floor behind the counter with my back against the cabinet where my mother had kept her books for 30 years. For the first time since Sam's funeral, I understood exactly what it meant to be the last person carrying the Whitaker name. That night I did not sleep. I sat on the floor with my mother's shears beside me and opened the green ledger Sam had mentioned. I began reading every page from the final year of his life. Bookkeepers leave evidence behind even when they believe they are hiding everything. By sunrise, I understood what Sam had been doing. For almost 2 years, he had been secretly altering shipping records for the Corsetti organization. He had been taking small amounts of money from their accounts and moving it elsewhere. At first, the amounts were small enough to avoid attention. Eventually, the theft became enormous. The final amount had been enough to purchase a house. Instead, it had purchased him a coffin. But there was something else I realized while sitting there with my knees pressed against the cold cabinet. Sam had not called me from that diner because he was lonely. He had called because he already knew he would not see me again. He wanted his final words to me to matter. What I still did not understand was who else had been involved in the shipping records, or why Sam had been so frightened. Then I noticed a phone number circled in the corner of one page. I called it. The voice on the other end did not belong to Anthony Corsetti. It belonged to a man named Nicholas DeMarco. "Come to the North End before Corsetti's people find you again," he said. I did not go because I trusted him. I went because I knew my mother's florist shears would not protect me from men who wanted more than $600,000. The building on Hanover Street looked like an old bakery from the outside. That was intentional. Nicholas had no reason to advertise what happened inside. The smell of bread drifted upward through the floorboards, mixing with the expensive cologne worn by the men standing near the stairs. I climbed 2 flights and entered an office where Nicholas DeMarco sat behind a dark wooden desk. He was younger than I had imagined. He was also quieter. His silence was more intimidating than shouting would have been. He had the kind of face people remembered after seeing it once, but he carried himself in a way that made strangers forget to stare. "Your brother worked for the Corsettis," he said. "He also worked for me without either side knowing the truth." I listened. Nicholas explained that when Sam ran, he took a ledger belonging to him and a large amount of money belonging to the Corsetti family. Anthony Corsetti believed Nicholas had both. That was why Corsetti's men were searching for me. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Nicholas looked directly at me. "Nothing." His answer surprised me. Then he continued. "But there is one arrangement the old families still respect. It would make Corsetti leave you alone." I already knew where the conversation was going, but I forced myself to ask. "What arrangement?" "Marriage." I stared at him. "To you?" "Yes." Nicholas explained that the old families would think twice before attacking another family's wife. A woman protected by a powerful husband became dangerous to touch because harming her could start a war. I studied him for several seconds. Then I said, "I will marry you because I want to live long enough to understand what happened to my brother, but I will not pretend to love you." He said nothing. I continued, "I will not share your bed unless I choose to. You will never touch me without my permission." His eyes changed slightly. "Agreed." I took a breath. "My mother's flower shop remains mine." He nodded. "My name stays above the door." Another nod. "Agreed." That was the shortest negotiation of my life. There were no romantic promises. There was no affection. There was only a dangerous agreement between 2 strangers who needed each other for completely different reasons. That Thursday afternoon, a florist from Vermont became engaged to the most dangerous man on the Boston waterfront. Our wedding was small, civil, and almost painfully cold. A judge married us in a plain office at the Suffolk County Courthouse. 2 men from Nicholas's side signed the register without asking questions. My aunt flew in from Rutland and cried through the entire ceremony because she believed I was finally happy. I wore a simple gray dress I had made myself. I refused to spend Corsetti money or DeMarco money on a wedding that neither of us wanted to celebrate. Nicholas did not kiss me. Outside the courthouse, he simply shook my hand as though we had finished a business transaction. Then he drove me to a brownstone on Louisburg Square that I had never known belonged to him. The house was enormous, quiet, and immaculate. He took me to a bedroom on the 3rd floor and pointed toward the door. "This is your room. The lock is on the inside. I do not have a copy of the key." I stared at him, waiting for the condition. There was none. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "You can come downstairs if you want. If you prefer to stay here, someone will bring you a tray." Then he walked away. I locked the door anyway. For the next 11 nights, I slept behind that lock. Every morning, someone placed a small vase of fresh flowers outside my door. Never a bouquet. Always one flower. One morning it was a single dahlia. The next morning it was white lisianthus. Then a pale rose. As a florist, I understood flowers differently from most people. A single stem could say something that an entire bouquet could not. Still, I refused to let myself believe those flowers meant anything. I had not married Nicholas because I loved him. I had married him because I wanted to survive. But Nicholas kept every promise he had made in that office above the bakery. He never touched my door. He never raised his voice. He never entered my room without permission. On the 12th morning, I finally came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. Nicholas was already there reading the newspaper. He looked at me, but did not smile. He poured coffee into a cup and asked how I wanted it. I told him. He made it exactly that way and returned to his newspaper as if my presence at the table were completely ordinary. A few minutes later, without looking up, he asked whether my bedroom was warm enough at night. I told him the radiator made a strange knocking sound. That afternoon, a repairman came and fixed it. Nicholas never mentioned it. Rosa told me later. Something inside me began to loosen. I had spent weeks expecting control, threats, and cruelty. Instead, I was being given space. Then came the first time I became afraid for Nicholas instead of being afraid of him. 10 days after that breakfast, I went alone to a wholesale flower market near Chelsea to collect an order of white ranunculus. I was loading the flowers into the trunk of a plain sedan when a black car pulled into the alley behind me. 2 men stepped out. One of them knew my name. "Clara, get in the car. Anthony wants to speak with you." I looked around. The alley was almost empty. I did not scream. I knew nobody would come. Instead, I reached into the trunk and grabbed my florist's shears. "Take another step and you will regret it." They laughed. Then they stopped. Nicholas DeMarco was standing at the entrance to the alley. His coat was open and his breathing was heavier than usual. He had clearly come in a hurry. He looked at the 2 men. "Back away from my wife." Nobody moved for several seconds. Then the men left. Nicholas walked toward me, but stopped several feet away. His hands remained open at his sides. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No. I had it under control," I said. He looked at me. "I know." Then his expression softened. "That is what scares me." He drove me home himself that night. When we reached the brownstone, he stopped at the bottom of the stairs and watched me go upstairs. He did not follow. After Chelsea, the house began to feel different. Nicholas started eating dinner in the kitchen instead of his study. He asked what I would plant in the garden if I could choose anything. 3 days later, 4 flats of hellebores appeared near the back door. He told me his mother had loved them. I began discovering things about Nicholas that nobody outside the house seemed to know. He could not sleep in complete darkness. He secretly read the poetry books his mother had left behind. He had learned to make coffee when he was 14 because his mother had become too weak to lift a kettle. He still measured the coffee with a small silver spoon that had belonged to her. Rosa could scold him in 2 languages, and Nicholas accepted it without complaint. He carried her groceries. He refused to let her climb the tall shelves. To the outside world, Nicholas DeMarco was a dangerous man. Inside his home, he was careful with people the world had already forgotten. I did not ask to notice these things. I noticed them anyway. For a long time, I told myself I was staying because of Corsetti. I told myself our marriage was temporary. Once the danger disappeared, I would return to Beacon Hill, reopen my mother's shop, and live quietly. But somewhere between the alley in Chelsea and the greenhouse behind the brownstone, that explanation stopped being true. I realized it one Sunday morning when Nicholas came into the kitchen with dirt on his cuffs. He had been working in the garden. Outside, I noticed a rose bush growing along the southern wall. It was my mother's favorite variety. I had mentioned it only once. Nicholas had driven several hours to Vermont to find one and planted it where the light was best. He never told me. I simply discovered it. That was how his kindness worked. He never announced it. He simply did it. Then the trouble came from inside his own family. Nicholas's cousin, Vince, managed the family's trucking operations. He had made mistakes for years, and Nicholas had protected him out of loyalty. One afternoon, I was walking toward the study when I heard Vince speaking. $600,000 for a florist, Nico. Everyone is laughing at you. I stopped outside the door. Vince continued. First you protect her in Chelsea. Then you buy flowers for her. Now her brother's ledger is sitting where she can reach it. She is becoming your weakness. Nicholas's voice was quiet. Be careful, Vince. I am only saying what everyone else is thinking. I did not wait to hear more. I returned to the kitchen with a tray of tea and sat alone. The fear I thought I had escaped returned. Maybe Vince was right. Maybe I really was a weakness. Maybe Nicholas's kindness had a price. That night, I ate dinner upstairs and locked my door. For 4 days, I stayed there. Nicholas never forced me out. Every morning, a single flower appeared on the tray outside my room. On the third morning, it was a white ranunculus. I understood the message. He remembered Chelsea. On the fifth morning, Rosa entered my room. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me things about Nicholas that I had never known. His mother had died slowly from cancer. She had spent her final days in a room downstairs. Nicholas had learned to care for the greenhouse because his mother loved flowers. His younger sister had been killed when a rival family planted a bomb beneath the wrong car. Nicholas had carried his sister home himself. Rosa looked at me and said, "That man does not know how to protect the people he loves with words. He only knows how to stand between them and danger. Do not mistake that for a lack of feeling." After she left, I went downstairs. Nicholas was sitting in his study with my mother's green ledger resting on his knees. He was not reading it. He was simply holding it. I sat on the floor across from him. "I heard, Vince," I said. "I heard everything." Nicholas closed the ledger. "You had every right to hide." I looked at him. "I am sorry." He did not answer. Instead, he held the ledger out to me. I took it. We remained there for a long time without speaking. But something had changed. Neither of us could pretend anymore. The next danger came from Vince. He made a secret deal with Anthony Corsetti. In exchange for having his own debts erased, Vince told Corsetti where I would be on Saturday night. His plan was simple. He wanted Corsetti's men to take me, force Nicholas to surrender the ledger, and then make both families believe the other side had betrayed them. Vince wanted a war because he believed he could profit from it. That Saturday night, I noticed a black sedan across from the flower shop. Two men sat inside. They were not talking. They were not using their phones. They were watching my building. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I called the brownstone. Rosa answered. "Rosa, the sedan is here again." Her voice became serious. "Miss Clara, do not open the door." I hung up and remembered something my mother had taught me. She always kept a spare key to the roof inside an old hollow candle holder in the back office. I found it. Minutes later, two unfamiliar men entered the flower shop. I did not reach for my shears. I ran upstairs and opened the roof access. The roof overlooked a narrow alley. Across from it stood another building. An old fire escape connected the rooftops. The city had condemned it more than once. Someone had broken every glass panel in a small greenhouse nearby, and nobody had cleaned up the pieces. The metal walkway was covered with broken glass. I was wearing only stockings. Then I heard footsteps behind me. The men were coming up the stairs. I had no time to think. I stepped onto the fire escape and ran, barefoot, across the broken glass. Every step cut into my feet. I refused to scream because I knew the men would hear me. Halfway across, one of them reached the roof and called my name. I recognized his voice. He had eaten at Nicholas's table. He had been inside our home. He was someone I had trusted. I climbed down the other side and ran into the alley. Blood marked every step. I ran through the north end until I reached the back entrance of Nicholas's building. I had a key. I opened the door and collapsed onto the tile. Nicholas found me there with my hands wrapped around my bleeding ankles. I will never forget the expression on his face. It was not anger. It was fear. He looked at my feet and immediately removed his coat. He placed it on the floor and carefully lifted me into his arms. He carried me into a small bathroom at the back of the building. I had never seen it before. He sat me on the edge of an old tub and filled a copper basin with warm water. Then he knelt in front of me. He placed my injured foot in his hands and began washing away the blood. He did not use a cloth. He used his hands. He moved slowly and carefully, removing every small piece of glass with a pair of tweezers. His hands never shook. The water became red. He emptied it and filled the basin again. He repeated the process until my feet were clean. His sleeves were soaked nearly to his elbows, but he did not care. His uncle Salvatore stood silently in the doorway. Salvatore was one of the few men in the family who still believed there had to be a difference between power and cruelty. He watched Nicholas kneeling before his wife. He watched the most feared man in Boston treating my injured feet as if they were something precious. Nicholas did not know Salvatore was watching. He would have done it anyway. That was what mattered. After Rosa wrapped my feet in clean gauze, I asked her to bring me the green ledger. I also asked for a pen and paper. I knew my mother's accounting system. She had used flower names as symbols. Roses represented one family. Lilies represented another. Other flowers represented different accounts and amounts. Sam had learned the system from her. I spent 2 hours studying the ledger. At 3 in the morning, I finally understood the truth. Nicholas had never stolen the money. Vince had. For 3 years, Vince had been secretly taking money from both organizations. Sam had discovered him. When Sam realized the numbers no longer matched, Vince panicked. That was why my brother had died. Vince had arranged his death to protect himself. I finally knew the truth. But I did not tell Nicholas immediately. I needed to be certain. The family council met the following Tuesday in the same building above the bakery where Nicholas and I had first met. Salvatore sat at the head of the table. Nicholas sat beside him. Vince sat across the room. Anthony Corsetti had also been invited. Everyone expected a war. I had asked for 10 minutes. Salvatore had given me 5. I entered the room carrying my mother's green ledger and placed it on the table. Then I opened it. I began reading. Names, dates, payments, meetings, amounts. Everything was there. I explained how Sam had recorded the transactions using our mother's flower code. I showed exactly where the money had gone. Then I looked directly at Vince. You took the money. He said nothing. You arranged for my brother to die. The room became completely silent. Anthony Corsetti stared at the ledger. Then he looked at Nicholas. Finally, he looked at me. I could see that he had suspected something for a long time, but had never been able to prove it. He closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. Mrs. DeMarco, your brother deserved justice. You deserve peace. He looked around the table. There will be no war. Nicholas remained silent. He did not need to speak. The truth had already spoken for him. Salvatore looked at Vince. Leave. Vince stood and walked out of the room. What happened to him afterward is something I never asked about. I did not need to know. I had entered that room as a woman who had recently been carried across a bathroom floor. I walked out as the woman who had stopped a war with a flower ledger and the truth. 6 months later, my mother's flower shop had expanded into the building next door. We had 3 employees. Everyone called me the boss. The sign above the door still carried my mother's name. Nicholas had quietly purchased the building next door and connected the 2 spaces so I would have more room to work. He never made a big announcement about it. He simply did it. Anthony Corsetti began ordering white lilies every week and sending them to my brother's grave in Vermont. He never asked me to thank him. I never did. One Sunday morning, I found Nicholas in the back of the shop with his sleeves rolled up and a bucket of peonies beside him. He was trying to arrange them. He had already damaged 2 stems. Rosa stood behind the counter pretending not to watch. Nicholas looked at me. Clara. I walked toward him. He looked down at the flowers. I have handled dangerous men. I have signed papers that changed people's lives. I have kept every promise I made to you. He lifted 1 damaged peony. But I cannot figure out how to arrange these. I sat beside him. I took the flower from his hand and examined it. You are trying too hard. I placed the stem back into his hand. Slowly, he followed my instructions. The flower finally settled into place. Nicholas looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I had never expected to hear from him. I used to believe keeping someone safe meant standing between them and everything dangerous. His voice became softer. My mother, my sister, everyone who worked for me. He looked into my eyes. Then you came into my life. He reached for my hand. You taught me that protecting someone does not mean controlling every step they take. I smiled. I did cross that roof alone. He nodded. And nearly destroyed your feet doing it. I laughed softly. You were the one who washed them. A faint smile appeared on his face. Then let me keep doing something. What? The Sunday mornings. The terrible flower arrangements. The quiet dinners. The arguments. The ordinary days. And the next 50 years. I did not answer with words. I leaned forward and rested my forehead against his. Some things do not need to be spoken. I picked up another peony and placed it in his hand. Then I guided his fingers toward the stem. Like this. He adjusted the flower. This time he got it right. Outside, the bell above the shop door had not yet rung for the first customer. Inside the workroom, Nicholas DeMarco was learning how to arrange flowers. Not because he needed to impress anyone. Not because someone had ordered them. He was doing it because the woman he loved had shown him how. Once, I had crossed a dangerous fire escape barefoot through broken glass because I needed to save his life. Now, years later, the most feared man on Boston's waterfront was sitting beside me in a flower shop, patiently learning how to care for something delicate. Somehow, that was the ending I never knew I needed. The bell above the door finally rang. Neither of us looked up. The peonies were finally leaning in the right direction.